Just very grateful to be here. Over the past few years, many have asked us why an artist-run organization advocates for new roles for artists in fields that don't seem to have any relationship to the arts. Well, we do it because we believe that artists actually have an increasingly important role in helping to solve some of America's most entrenched challenges in business and social innovation. However, the way that we think about artists must first be disrupted if artists are to realize their full potential. Art is about power. And throughout history, any place that you find totalitarian or oligarchical expansion in which few resources come to increasingly rest in the hands of fewer and fewer people, there you also have always found artists. Tiananmen Square, Arab Spring, Occupy Wall Street, Black Lives Matter. Art is a creative political expression, and people who make art have a voice. The artist, the human, is the activator, not the commodity that the artist produces. Artists are creative disruptors with the power to transform systems and markets and companies. We divine new solutions that many others just can't see. But art is not only about power. In the 21st century, we must also recognize that art is most certainly about money, but it is still also about meaning. In my presentation today, we're not going to talk about art. We're going to talk about artists, the humans that produce the art, the human resources behind the industry. And together we're going to explore some of the political and economic realities for many artists and highlight a few ways that artists are already working across sectors as full participants in sustainable capitalism. So if we're going to talk about money, let's start at the grand slam of money. Just a few weeks ago, world leaders, CEOs, and intellectuals made their annual trek to Davos for the World Economic Forum. From China's economic turmoil to the global terrorist threat to new disruptive technologies, they certainly have a lot to talk about, wrote Xavier de Sousa Briggs, Vice President of Economic Opportunity and Markets for the Ford Foundation. But he cautioned, when the talk inevitably returns to the growing gap between the haves and the have-nots, participants should avoid falling into yesterday's discussions about inequality. At places like Davos, discussions of inequality tend to focus on how large the gap is, how wide disparities have grown, and how extreme inequality hurts those at the bottom. And this makes the idea of inequality very one-dimensional, something that the world's most influential people come to see as a problem, but not one that really impacts them. The truth is that inequality saps demand and reduces productivity and reduces competitiveness of companies and nations. For all the talk about inequality, we are still very much in the learning stages of operating our businesses in America, let alone our entire economy, in line with our highest social values. And while the private sector has a central role to play in tackling inequality and creating inclusive economies, the sector cannot do it alone. Workers, consumers, civil society, governments all have roles to play. And to this list, let us today add artists. It is time for leaders across sectors to think about finding new ways to engage with the techies, the research scientists, and the artists, the creative disruptors of our society. Artists throughout history have remarked on the bliss that accompanies a great creative insight. Einstein described his realization of the theory of general relativity as the happiest moment in his life. Perhaps more poetically, Virginia Woolf once opined that how odd the creative power that brings the whole universe at once to order. Today, however, creativity and its value, at least in America, must be understood in the context of capitalism. And perhaps no artist of the last 50 years is more closely associated with the capitalist impulse than Andy Warhol. He once said, "Making money is art, working is art, and good business," he said, "is the best art." Warhol was a skilled social networker long before there was a social network. He parlayed his fame into a personal brand around the world, in part because he gave people hope that they would be famous, if only for 15 minutes. If anyone in this room questions or has ever thought that artists are disconnected from the world and don't understand what's going on, consider Warhol and the number of selfies that have been taken today alone inside this building. You see, Warhol understood human motivation. And so when we speak of innovation, many miss one very important fact. Innovation is not just a design issue, and it's not just a technology issue. It is a human behavior issue. And this is where artists excel. But before we go forward, let's go back. Let's go back thousands and thousands of years when a grandmother and her great-great-great-granddaughter could expect to live more or less the same lives. Entire generations lived in physical proximity to where they were born. Human development was local and linear. But in my lifetime alone, let's look at what has happened due to technology. Technology has gone from something that was primarily for academics to something that many of us now fully integrate into our daily lives. In just a few years, we have come to live in a digital world, and distance between people has disappeared. Digital change is at such an exponential rate that today a mother and her daughter will likely live a radically different life. You see, we no longer live in a linear world. Our world is an exponential and global one. To illustrate this point, I will borrow an example from Peter Diamandis of Singularity University. He calls it the new Kodak moment. In 1996, Kodak had a market cap of $28 billion and 140,000 employees worldwide. 1996 was also the same year that they turned down full-scale development of the digital camera. By 2012, Kodak was bankrupt with less than 17,000 employees, and in that same year, Instagram, with only 13 employees, had a market cap of $1 billion when it was acquired by Facebook. Today, entire industries like manufacturing, healthcare, and finance are being disrupted by very small startup companies that are not part of the system. But what happens after the disruption phase? What happens after all the disruptive products themselves dematerialize? Consider this. Google's largest marketplace right now in the world is Africa. In 2010, there were 2 billion of us connected online. By 2020, 5 billion of us will be connected online. That is 3 billion new creative minds, most from a non-Westernized point of view, with the same access to artificial intelligence and technology that you and I have in our hands today. And in 1995, that $1 trillion of computational power that you find most of us have in our pockets was the same amount that the U.S. government had in the mid-90s. As technology becomes ubiquitous and our world becomes increasingly digital, the only differentiating factor, I believe, is how people will use the technology that is available. So business success resides in the ability to think creatively about the future, but very few CEOs are going to tell you that their companies are good at creativity. And this makes sense to me because business is still mostly a linear process, and creativity is not. But you see, this is where artists excel. The artist Mel Chen defines art as a catalytic force that allows new options to become visible. The artistic process is an intuitive process guided by human motivation. The artist, the activator, is the activator, not the commodity that is produced by the artist. Marcel Duchamp changed everything in art when he conceptualized the work Fountain. In one work, Duchamp transformed artists from craft people who made things into thinkers who could transform things. One of his lessons to us is this: if you redefine and expand the definition of artist, you change the work of art. Duchamp used his process to co-opt an entire manufacturing industry and simultaneously disrupted long-standing artistic institutions that had been around for a very long time. He became, as Mel Chen referred to, a catalytic force that allowed new options to become visible. This is no surprise because this is what artists do. In his book Linchpin, author and innovator Seth Godin wrote, "Our society is struggling because during times of change, the very last people you need on your team are well-paid bureaucrats. You see, the compliant masses, they don't help so much when you don't know what to do next. What we need are original thinkers, provocateurs, and people who care. Every organization, he writes, needs a linchpin, one person that can bring it all together and make a difference. Some organizations haven't realized it, but they need an artist. People with a genius for finding a new answer, a new connection, a new way of getting things done. So this begs the question, how are we educating artists in the 21st century? For the past 75 years, the American education system operates in much the same way that it was first designed to support an industrial economy, seeking to train people to become cogs in an industrial machine, subspecialized, eliminating variance. In the past couple of years, a group called BFA, MFA, PhD has generated a lot of debate and controversy around the subject of artist education with their report, Artist Report Back. It asked the question, what is the work of art in the age of a $120,000 art degree? We heard Titus talk a little bit about that this morning. And personally, I would reframe the question to ask, what is the work of the artist in the modern age? BFA, MFA, PhD is often dismissed by deans, faculty members, and artists alike as a vocational argument for art. They claim that the group is trying to assess the value of art arising from measurable impact rather than from the value of art that is intrinsic as a public good. But I personally think this is not the more important distinction we should be talking about. But even if it is art as a public good, I will put to you, then we should be paying artists the same salaries in healthcare that we also pay other public workers who provide a public good. It gets better. Here are some of the group's controversial findings, but I want to share them with you because they speak loudly to something that I've been thinking a lot about over the last 3 years. Of artist graduates in the United States who reported visual and performing arts as their degrees, only 7% earned their living as a working artist. 24% are educators, 17 work in sales, 11 in service jobs, 10 in various professional fields, and 10% haven't worked in the last 5 years. 8% are managers, 4 in medicine, 3 in business and finance, 3 in blue-collar occupations, and 3 in other fields. How should we view this data? Well, I'll give you my take on it. According to this data, artists are already everywhere, in every sector of our economy. All we need to do is put intentionality to finding new ways for them to activate and use their skills in their chosen fields. The world economy is calling for integrative, macroscopic thinkers and for those artists willing to combine their unique knowledge and skill sets and cross sectors. That's a very important point. There is great opportunity. Our work at Ideas xLab over the last 3 years has led us to believe this unequivocally, and that opportunity is growing. In the past 25 years, we have moved from an information economy to a knowledge economy, and now we are moving into a human economy, as described by the Harvard Business Review this way. People will still bring to their work essential traits that can't be and won't be programmed into software, like creativity, passion, character, and collaborative spirit. Their humanity, in other words. The ability to leverage these strengths will be the source of one organization's superiority over another in the years to come. Close quote. This presents a substantial opening for artists, but how do we make this happen? Well, there are no easy answers, but here are a few things that we have been thinking about very hard over the last few years, and that must be addressed. A different training and education model for artists is needed. The current prevailing model of educating artists probably can't get the job done because higher education systems are financially incentivized to keep current operations largely in place. Second, we must form complex relationships with industry. And this is not just a matter of deploying design thinking and turning artists into designers. There are already a lot of those in the market. We need sustained open partnerships and action research to create a radical new career path for artists in industry. Artists deploying creative intelligence, not just another group who deploys design thinking. And lastly, new models of arts philanthropy are needed to support innovation. Current models do not, by and large, provide access to funds for artists of color, or do they foster impact investing in artist innovation at the ground level where diversity and diversive thinking flourish? Innovation depends on these two things. New business models will provide financial access and independence for artists, but I agree that what most of you all are thinking, it will prove disruptive for some. It's not going to be easy, but it is already throughout the country in small and big ways underway. Ultimately, here's the lesson from startup business to the arts world and education and philanthropy establishment. If you are not going to disrupt yourself, someone else will. Technology has provided democratizing tools that are bringing with them new promise for both artists and society at large, and using the tools of the age in disruptive ways to change society is an area that has well been trodden by artists for hundreds, if not thousands, of years. So today, how we as artists will choose to relate to power, and how will we choose to relate to money and meaning? Let us begin to understand that our role as artists understand our role as artists in a way that encompasses both the past and the future simultaneously. Let us recognize that there currently exists a call to explore the interrelatedness of our society in new ways, and realize that our value as artists lies not in those objects that we produce, but even more so in who we are, how we work, and most importantly, why we do it. Our value is both a mirror of reflection and a hammer to shape new realities into the world in which we live.